Hello, my name is Freddy Guante. This is my video presentation for my online course in criminal procedures class. Uh, Today I'm going to be talking about my assigned case, which was the case of Brandon Daniels against the state of Texas, a capital punishment case. On this case, the type of crime committed or where the defendant was being accused of a capital murder. Uh, The defendant was in fact being accused of killing a police officer while the officer was discharging his lawful duty. The incident occurred at a Walmart in the city of Austin, Travis County, Texas. Uh, the incident happened on April 6, 2012, just past midnight on that day. Uh, some of the key players in this case were, of course, the defendant, Brandon Daniels, the victim, Officer Jaime Padron, who lost his life during the incident, prosecutor Bill Bishop and his partner, defense attorney Brad Urieta and Russell Herster Jr., uh, the judge, Brenda Kennedy, key witnesses, Lincoln Lamira, Archie Lopez, Monica Lawson, Detective Fugit, who was the lead detective on the investigation, some expert witnesses such as Dr. Master, Dr. Harold Scott, who in fact who in fact testify in favor of the defendant, trying to make the allegation that the defendant was intoxicated to a degree where he was impaired and should be fully responsible for the actions committed. So, at the beginning of the trial, with the opening statement, that's how our trial starts. The uh, prosecution provides an opening statement to the judge and to the jury, stating the facts of the case and what they are intending to prove, which in this case was that Brandon Daniels was in fact at the location where the incident occurred, and then Brandon Daniels did in fact knew that Jaime Padron was a police officer, knew that Jaime Padron was discharging his lawful duty as a police officer, and then in there knowingly, intentionally, and willingly killed Officer Jaime Padron. Uh, the defense opening statement pretty much was based on the uh, idea that Brandon Daniel was intoxicated to a degree that he did not have full control of his actions at the time of the incident. Brandon Daniel had a little bit of a drug abuse history, and I believe the drug of choice at this time was Xanax, so he was high on Xanax, and that was the argument of the defense at this time. When it comes to the witness testimony, several witnesses testified from, Walmart employees, Walmart managers, and just people that were shopping at the store when the incident occurred. Some of the witnesses advised that Brandon appeared to be intoxicated. Some others said that he appeared to be normal. Some of them said that he appeared to be drunk. No, so during the closing arguments of the trial, the prosecution, they entered the fact that Brandon Daniels did then and there knew what he was doing. He stayed at the store for long enough where an officer was called. He took a gun inside the store that he said that he don't normally carry. He had the gun ready and loaded to go, and then when the opportunity presented itself, he killed an officer. He killed Officer Jaime Padron. Brandon Daniel never denied killing Officer Jaime Padron. Brandon Daniel, in fact, said at one point that he was sorry, but then his actions while incarcerated will say that he will write letters making fun of the situation and things like that. The defense, during the closing arguments, again try to make a point saying that Brandon Daniel was intoxicated to a degree where he should have been held liable to the standard of being punished with a capital punishment, which is death. That they wanted him to get life in prison. Uh, After these statements were given, the jury was provided with instructions as to what to do, and while they deliberate, which is, made the decision whether Brandon Daniel, in fact, was going to continue to be a threat to society if they do not apply the death penalty. So that was pretty much as far as the facts of the case. Then we went into the verdict, where Brandon Daniel was in fact found guilty on the base that the jury did believe that he will continue to be a threat to society if he was not executed. Uh, so the verdict was given. Brandon Daniel seems to be calm the whole entire time. The sentencing was he was sentenced to death, and the execution date was to be pending upon based on the appeal process, because every death penalty in the state of Texas is granted an appeal. So automatically he has the right to appeal that. But more than likely, based on the information provided for this case, he will be executed. Okay, so in conclusion, the critical analysis and to apply the textbook to this case and the things that took place during the trial, uh, just to recap, the office in question here was the capital punishment where Brandon Daniel was being charged with the murder of Officer Jaime Padron. The big question throughout the whole trial was whether or not Brandon Daniel was intoxicated to a degree where he did not have full mental capacity or use of his mental faculties when the incident took place, in order to being able to identify Officer Jaime Padron as a police officer when the incident took place. Uh, First, I would like to start with the trial. So the book starts on chapter 13, page 374, talking about trials and juries. So the book itself defines trial as a formal examination of evidence before a judge and or a jury in order to determine or decide guilt in a case of in a criminal case. In a criminal case or a civil case. So that will be your trial. In this case, the trial ran its course. Trial, of course, started with the opening statement, where both prosecution and defense attorney presented their case to the court and the jury. I had where an opening statement. Give me just a second. I'll find you the definition for the textbook when we talk about the opening statement. So the opening statement, once the jury has been selected and sworn, the trial begins with the opening statement by both sides, outlining what they believe the evidence in the case will prove. The purpose of opening a statement is to advise the jury of what the attorney intends to prove. So pretty much, the prosecution in this case, their opening statement was focusing on that Brandon Daniels knew what he was doing. He knew he was at the store. He knew he had a gun. He knew the gun was loaded. And he appeared to be waiting on a police officer and had made mention before of trying to kill a police officers and things like that. When it comes to the defense attorneys, the opening statement for them was trying to give the jury the idea that Brandon Daniel was intoxicated when the incident took place. That Brandon Daniel was high on Xanax and or alcohol, and then therefore he was not using his full mental capacity as far as understanding what was going on and what he did. That was the opening statement for them. And then the book describes and talks about opening statement on chapter 13, page 398. After that, the trial continued its course. where they got motion for judgment or acquittal. That's on page 400, chapter 13, again, trials and juries. Um, the trial continued and went all the way through. I'll go fast forward to the verdict. So when it comes to the verdict, the book described the verdict as a decision of the trial, just the decision of the trial. Pretty much, what decision was reached by the jury. So uh, the jury pretty much was provided with jury instructions prior to, after listening to the case, and prior to going to uh, make their decision or discuss about whether Brandon Daniel was in fact should be punished with the death penalty or life in prison, which was the only thing pretty much in question during this case, because Brandon Daniel never denied that he killed Officer Jaime Padron. The only question here was whether he should be sentenced to die or whether he should be sentenced to life in prison. Uh, so the question that the jury had to answer for themselves in order to reach this conclusion is: do you found from the evidence presented before you, and without any doubt, that there is a probability that the defendant, in this case Brandon Daniel, will continue uh, with his criminal career, or do you believe that he continued to be a danger to himself or for society, or do you believe that he had the chance to rehabilitate? Which the jury answered the question, yes, they believe that Brandon Daniels will not have an opportunity to rehabilitate, and I believe they made this decision based on the fact that during the time that Brandon Daniel was incarcerated, he continued to get in trouble and do things in the jail that caused him to uh, get some type of punishment within the jail or prison. During the time he was there, he was also found in possession of like homemade alcohol and things like that. Also, by looking at Brandon Daniels' past behavior, past criminal behavior, I believe they could see a trace there where he was just slowly but surely getting worse as far as committing crimes. Um, and then, of course, they then another question was that they had to answer for themselves was: do you believe that Brandon Daniel will rehabilitate? If, in the case of being sentenced to life in prison, do you believe Brandon Daniel will rehabilitate, or do you believe that he will in fact kill the gang? And closing statements, when it comes to the closing statement in the sentencing part, the prosecutor made a good point where he said, Brandon Daniels went from committing minor crimes to committing drug crimes, and then the crimes he was committing would little by little get higher and higher until they got to the point where he killed an officer. So the jury answered yes, they did believe that Brandon Daniel, uh, given the opportunity, would kill again. So therefore, he was sentenced to death. That's how the verdict was reached. So when we're going to talk about the sentencing part of it, we will move to chapter 14, starting on page 416, which talks about the sentencing. The sentencing is the punishment assigned to the defendant found guilty within a court of law by the judge or the jury. So the sentencing is the punishment. So when we think about the punishment, we want to ask ourselves, why do we punish? Purpose of punishment can be restoration, deterrence. Well, let me define restoration. According to the book on page 418, restoration is the idea that the offenders deserve punishment lies at the heart of retribution. This is for minor cases, more when you do retribution. But when it comes to hard punishment, the point of this is deterrence, to deter that behavior, to deter the criminal behavior, to deter the defendants or person found guilty from committing crimes, bad punishment, bad fear of punishment, or to rehabilitate. That's the other part of sentencing. In this case, the jury did specify that Brandon Daniels did not they did not believe he would rehabilitate from his behavior. And then rehabilitation, the book talks about rehabilitation on page 420, chapter 14, sentencing. Uh, Rehabilitation it assumes that criminal behavior is the result of social or psychological disorders, and that the treatment of such disorders should be the primary goals of the correction. In conclusion, Brandon Daniels was found guilty. Brandon Daniels was sentenced to death. He was found guilty of a capital murder, and therefore received the capital punishment for the killing of Officer Jaime Padron.